Oh, sing a new song to the eternal.
Shout praise, all earth, break into music and song. Praise the eternal with the lyre and song.
Chance to do the Advent.
Let the sea and all within it thunder praise. The world and all its inhabitants, let rivers clap their hands. Let mountains sing in chorus, or sing a new song to the eternal.
About Advent. This starts the season of Advent. We have our Advent wreath here. And I think it's a tradition of this congregation to light an Advent wreath 4 Sundays before Christmas Eve. Now, the word Advent, which means coming, was originally used for the coming of the Christ and applied only to that day. And after the 6th century, the meaning was expanded to include the whole period of preparation for this day as it is now. The Advent season marks the beginning of the Christian church year. The Orthodox Christian church year is based on 3 main incidents in the life of Jesus: Christmas, Easter, and Pentecost, which form the framework of the Christian year. Each of these great festivals was preceded by a period of preparation to enable Christians to meditate on the spiritual significance of these events in the life of Jesus. Although the birth of Jesus or the Nativity is a major holy holiday, the 4 Sundays of Advent are recognized as the Advent season, a time of reflection and expectation. Advent begins on the Sunday nearest November 30th, St. Andrew's Day. For Unitarian Universalists, Advent means less than it does for more traditional Christians. However, Advent can provide an opportunity to deepen our awareness of the spiritual values inherent in the winter festival season. The use of the Advent wreath originated a few hundred years ago among the Lutherans in Germany. The wreaths are made of evergreens and are either suspended from the ceiling or placed on a table. 4 candles are fastened in holders to the wreath and are representing the 4 weeks of Advent. So on the first Sunday of Advent, 1 candle is lit and allowed to burn during the whole service. And on each of the following Sundays, an additional candle is lit. And one is lit for hope, peace, joy, love, and the candle in the middle is lit on Christmas Eve. And that's it's to signify, it's the center of the wreath to signify Christ, the light of the world. So I'm going to start and light that first candle. And this first candle is for hope. What is hope? Hope gives light to people in times of darkness and strength and courage to people in times of trouble and defeat. Hope is looking forward, believing in the future. Hope is the understanding that we have choices in how we react to situations, to others, and to our own thoughts. Hope is saying yes to life. For what are you grateful for?
Please stand as you're able and sing our next hymn, which is number 126 in the Gray Hymnal, Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing. Hear these sacred words. From the Taoist tradition, I have 3 things to teach: simplicity, patience, compassion. These are your greatest treasures. Simple in actions and thoughts, you return to the source of your being. Patient with both friends and enemies, you accord with the way things are. Compassionate towards yourself, you reconcile all beings in the world.
From the earth-centered tradition, a Cherokee traveler's greeting. I will draw thorns from your feet. We will walk the white path together. Like a brother of my own blood, I will love you. I will wipe your tears and put your aching heart to rest.
From the Islamic tradition, when God said, "My hands are yours," I saw that I could heal any creature in the world. I saw that the divine beauty in each heart is the root of all time and space.
From the Jewish tradition, how precious is your kindness, O God. People take refuge in the shadow of your wings. For with you is the source of life. By your light shall we see light.
From the Christian tradition, there are wars where no one marches with a flag, though that does not keep casualties from mounting. Our hearts irrigate this earth. We are fields before each other. How can we live in harmony? First, we need to know we are madly in love with the same God.
From the Buddhist tradition, look within, the rising and the falling. What happiness! How sweet to be free! It is the beginning of life, of mastery and patience, of good friends along the way, of a pure and active life. So live in love. Do your work. Make an end of your sorrows. See how the jasmine releases and lets fall its withered flowers. Let fall willfulness and hatred.
From the Hindu tradition, where the mind is without fear, where knowledge is free, where words come from the depths of truth, where the clear stream of reason has not lost its way, into that heaven let me awake.
A Rainy Morning by Ted Kooser. A young woman in a wheelchair, wearing a black nylon poncho spattered with rain, is pushing herself through the morning. You've seen how pianists sometimes bend forward to strike the keys, then lift their hands, draw back to rest, then lean again to strike just as the chord fades. Such is the way this woman strikes at the wheels, then lifts her long white fingers, letting them float, then bends again to strike just as the chair slows, as if into a silence. So expertly she plays the chords of this difficult music she has mastered, her wet face beautiful in its concentration, while the wind turns the pages of rain.
My sharing is wheels under my baggage, and I'll get to just what that means. I think the metaphor of carrying something heavy and trying to make it lighter is what I'm trying to get at today. And in preparing for my sharing this morning, I don't like to call this sermon because it sounds too much like when my mother wanted me to be a priest. About 10 years ago, Bonnie and I were sitting in the passenger's lounge at Logan Airport waiting to board a flight. My attention was drawn to the man across the hallway, shining shoes. I was impressed with his attitude and his demeanor, his efficiency and his grace as he moved into his work. It was clear to me that this was not a job to him, it was a calling. So I went over and I chatted with Weldon Bishop for a few minutes. He gave me some ingredients for the poem that I knew was beginning to simmer in my mind. Above his stand and chair, he'd placed a sign, and it told me the title of my poem, Classic Shoe Shine, $3. Wheeled suitcase in tow, the weary traveler shuffles to Weldon's stand, slumps up the steps, droops himself in the cushioned chair, and surrenders. Weldon folds and tosses his Boston Globe, lifts himself to casual attention, tilts in easy greeting. He contemplates his calling, his priesthood of redemption and resurrection, bows his head and steps in. He baptizes the lifeless footwear, spraying and wiping with his bottle of cleaner, smears on the healing polish, caressing scars and bruises, then rims the heel and edge of the sole with a darker stain as if framing a picture. In bent homage, he hunches over the inverted U of his buffing rag, arms stroking like pistons up and down, back and forth, pulling available light to the glowing shoes, now beaming in renewal. The healer steps back, darts in with a touch-up brush as if dispersing a blemish from a forgiven soul. The grateful king descends his throne, folds a 5 into Weldon's hand, moves through the air toward gate 22, where he will continue his ascent on Delta, wheeled suitcase now floating behind. I'm going to talk a little bit about baggage. There's a definition in the dictionary: bags, cases, containers which hold a traveler's articles during transit. Packages carried by the modern traveler to hold clothing, trip necessities, and on the return trip, souvenirs. According to the Oxford Dictionary, the word comes from a French derivation which means to tie up. Wheels come into the picture. If your baggage is to go where you go, it must be made movable. And I found out that the first suitcase on wheels was invented in 1908 by a Reverend James Cole, who used the suitcases to transport heavy books about the Bible. For many years, since the mid-'80s, I've skied out in the Rockies with my buddies and sometimes with my wife Bonnie. And I remember when my companions started to roll their baggage on wheeled suitcases, and even the ski bags had wheels on. For a long time I resisted. I still hauled my stuff the old-fashioned way, with muscled lifting and heavy stepping and bent down against the downward pull of gravity. And I think for a while I felt a little righteous about doing it. And then I thought maybe, that there might be something virtuous to it. And then I thought maybe it was a reflection of my childhood Catholicism, the need to do some penance in exchange for the joy of dancing on skis in the powdery snow in the Rockies. Seemed like a fair exchange to me. But I saw the light. I finally got my new stuff with the wheels. And now I can bring the baggage with me more easily, with less effort, and not be bent down by it. There's another kind of definition of baggage that we refer to, and that secondary definition is intangible things that get in the way. In some of my past sharing in past years, I've shared a bit about my own baggage, which pretty much started from my childhood with my schizophrenic mother, and a lot of misunderstanding and resentment that I had toward her at that young age, not fully understanding that her disease was not something that she asked for. And I apologize for the repetition for some of you who have heard this before and think it's time for a new topic, but what I must tell you is that the lessons that I've learned from this experience of dealing with my baggage, the lessons continue to unfold for me. I have new awarenesses that never cease to amaze me. I'm learning more about myself, and in so doing, getting closer and closer to my mother, who's been dead for many, many years now. She continues to be my teacher. And so it's my hope that in my sharing, you may hear something that is meaningful to you. Maybe meaningful for your own story, because as time goes on, I believe that everybody has a story. My baggage, the short version, was that when my mother died, there was unfinished business between us. Well into my adulthood, much longer than I wish to acknowledge, I carried resentment and anger for things that happened between us when I was a child. Much of it as a result of my mother's paranoid fear that Satan would have a stronger claim on her 3 sons than did Jesus. When I was finally mature enough to understand that my mother was powerless in that turbulence swirling around her, that she never asked for the voices of her demons, I knew I had to make an amend. I had to say I was sorry for me, if not for her. But I waited too long. When I was ready to do this, my mother was slipping into dementia, and I thought to myself, well, she wouldn't understand what I'm saying, but I meant well. End of story. And it was not the end of the story. I began subconsciously packing my own luggage with darkness and guilt about letting my mother go without that apology. Some things happened to me in my childhood. I learned to become very fluent in the language of schizophrenia. I knew what my mother needed to hear before she even finished a sentence in order to keep peace. And I carried that habit well into my adulthood. I still struggle with that because my initial reaction is I want to be seen as a good boy. And it's taken a lot, including a lot of help from my wife, to learn to be able to become fluent in the language of truthfulness. My coming to this point where I can talk about my childhood and treasure it and feel that my childhood was a gift to me. And my brothers, if you were to interview them separately from me, they would say the same thing. They wouldn't change a thing except for my mother to not suffer. I have learned so much, and I have learned in the sharing of my story that my story, my own baggage, gets lighter and lighter as I do this. So I've come to the confusion. I've come to the confusion. The conclusion that I have wheels under my baggage, many, many wheels. And these wheels come in many forms, and I kind of want to reflect on that. All of these wheels lighten the baggage and make it more meaningful to me. I would first of all say that one wheel is my connection with this church. I get a spiritual boost when I come here on Wednesdays. On all days, Thursdays for choir, and Sundays when I come here, I get a boost. I sometimes hear something I had to hear, and even if I just come by osmosis, I feel like I absorb something good, and this gives me a feeling of lightness. And in making me understand within the context of this church that there is something bigger than me, I guess the simple conclusion is that it helps me to understand that I don't have to be my own God. Music has been a wheel under my baggage. It's a gift at this time in my life. When I was a young boy, music was an escape for me, and I loved how it made me feel. It took me to a better place. And I think even now this happens to me participating in our own church choir. I think any member of our choir would tell you that we're all appreciative passengers on Francie's flying machine. She takes us on trips that energize us. We learn something from it. And I think the wonderful part of it is that we have a spirit of feeling that we're all part of something that is very special and bigger than any of us as individuals. There's another wheel called generosity. I've received so much generosity from so many people in my life. And it's impossible to keep score. It allows me to give and not count the cost. It's a gift. I should also say, within the context of the church, I would have to acknowledge that both our previous minister, Van, and our present minister, Vicky, have helped me with things in my story. I'm finally going to come to a huge wheel, which is called writing. And I first want to make a comment that a lot of you know that I have written a book about this childhood history, and my intention is not to publicize the book. I feel much more comfortable talking about what I have learned from what I put into it and what I have received from the sharing of this book. I wanted to get that out there. I began writing poetry, I thought accidentally, on the birth of my first granddaughter. And then more poems when my second granddaughter, who's here today, came along. I happened at the time, I was practicing my profession, dentistry, and one of my patients was a very talented, award-winning writer by the name of Dennis Must. We used to spend 45 minutes out of every hour talking about our families. Turns out his family had some interesting stuff going on which fed his creative energy. And my family, I shared much of my history with Dennis, and he kept saying to me, "You should write that down. You should write that down." And one day, after a particularly interesting conversation where we didn't get any dentistry done, he returned with a blank album and a card that I'll never forget that basically said, "Fill these pages." So I started, and he became my mentor. And I talked with him, and I'd bring new poems to him. And Dennis told me at one point, after the nature of my writing started to change a little bit, he said to me, "Your poetry is starting to swirl into dangerous territory. Pay attention." He saw long before I did that I was starting to deal with this unfinished business with my mother. And in time, I found out that he was right. As I put words on the paper that often turned into poems, I was getting from in here onto the paper in front of me this unresolved stuff with my mother, and there it was. And I could take the words and I could embellish it or make it more meaningful, and I almost felt like I could fix it. So I kind of came to the conclusion that poetry was words trying to fix what needs fixing for me. Stanzas taking away unasked for weight, wheels under my baggage. My poems expanded into stories about my childhood, and I was invited into a writer's group. And I said, I don't know how to write stories. I'm only writing poetry. He said, "Make your poems bigger." Interesting. And I found out if I need a poem, make the story shorter. It's like an accordion. What are we doing this week, you know? But with feedback from my writers group, there were other wheels. They helped me to further define what I was trying to say and what I was trying to understand about my history. Now, the huge, huge wheel was in this sharing of my story. And I would say to you, along with part of my baggage, I'm diverting just a little bit. It was very interesting when these disconcerting poems were starting to circle around. I was having nightmares about once every 3 weeks. I'd wake up, not only my wife, but the dog, who we had then, with a yell in the night, and I was trapped in a room that looked like the mental hospital where my mother was confined, with bars on the windows. This stuff was saying, you have to pay attention to something. And when I started writing my story, when I got to the most painful parts of acknowledging where I felt my failure was in loving and learning about my mother, I wrote it down and it went away. I'm still trying to figure that one out, but it did something for me. Sharing this story has been a huge step forward to getting wheels under my baggage. I have had feedback from people who have read my story, many of them strangers. I've been invited to about a dozen book clubs, and after I share at each book club, people come up to me and tell me, a few people out of the dozen or so at a book club will tell me that after reading my story, they're initiating conversations with their own siblings about stuff that went on in their family that they could not talk about. One event in Pennsylvania, a woman came to me almost in tears and said now she was seeking the therapy that she never thought she deserved, but felt differently after reading my book. The other day, I received a card that I'll share with you. There's a website called Goodreads where people share what they're reading, and I was invited to put my book on Goodreads. And one thing that I was allowed to do, or asked to do, as a way of kind of getting it out there, is to participate in what they call an author's giveaway program. So I signed up to give away 20 books. So what they do is they advertise it for 30 days, and then there was a list of about 220 people or something who requested the book. And then they kind of figured out who the book was going to and sent me the addresses, and I sent the book. About 1 week after the books went out, which is very, very quick for someone to receive the book and read it, I received this card in the mail. And it comes from California, Missouri. And the writing in it is very kind of forced in printing, like someone was, almost like a child would be working on penmanship in second grade or third grade. If that's done anymore, I don't know, with computers. But anyway, and there are a few words misspelled in this. And the card starts out this way. I hope it is okay that I am writing, W-R-I-G-H-T-I-N-G. My name is Thea, and I won your book from Goodreads. I greatly enjoyed your book. I am bipolar and don't often think about the effect my illness has on my family. Your book has helped me to be more aware of them. That's a huge wheel. It makes me feel that in the sharing of my story, I've helped someone else. And it affirms me, it affirms my family history, and it is very, very meaningful to me. In what I'm sharing, I recognize that I am not a psychologist, and just because I say writing helped me and my sharing of my story comes back to me in good ways doesn't mean that it works for everybody. But if you hear something that's meaningful and resonates with you, perhaps there are some answers if you're carrying any pain like that. It's no longer pain that I carry. This whole thing about wheeling your baggage too, it depends on whether you want to keep it with you. And I absolutely feel that it is part of me, and I don't want to throw it away. An extraordinary wheel under my baggage has been the people in my life. I've been gifted with friends, extraordinary friends from my work life, from my music commitments, my skiing and running buddies, and people from church here. Brothers who shared my childhood, who are just extraordinarily important to me now. My own family, my daughter who encouraged me and helped me with my writing, my granddaughters who are as enthusiastic about everything I do as I am of them, and my wife, Bonnie, who has been my friend, and without my knowing it, often a counselor who helped me to see these things that I was denying, and often said to me, no, that's not your imagination. I knew your mother, that happened. In a kind way, deal with it. And I have come a lot closer to feeling comfortable within my own skin because of all these gifts. So that I would say to you now that because of all these wheels, as far as I'm concerned, my baggage is transported on an 18-wheeler. And it is something that I do want to keep with me. It's something that's meaningful to me. I'll end up with a summation with a poem that is fairly new, Baggage Claim. My baggage has recycled through many transformations, circled patiently round the carousel, awaiting my recognition and rescue from the weary march of toppled suitcases, tipsy duffel bags, and bruised boxes. Stretched, thready at the seams, it bulged with the weight of my mother's dark shadows, my shoulder abraded by the downward pull of the frayed carrying strap, my tether to my young boy's resentment in trying to carry what I could not carry. Now my baggage rolls smooth on the wheels of acceptance and gratitude, connected by a handle short enough to be close to what must be remembered, long enough to allow, dare I say it, graceful posture in the pulling. The enclosed notice informs, this bag has been inspected. The unzipping released darkness, replacing it with light, thus accounting for its diminished weight. The official jargon further explains, love is governed by a different gravity. It is like feathers and cannot be weighed. All that remains in this bag is good stuff. Have a good rest of your trip and have a good day. No ticket needed to claim my baggage. It's now carry on. Thank you. I'd like to share a poem by David White. I think it's listed under Ted Kooser in the order of worship. David White, The Journey. Above the mountains, the geese turn into the light again, painting their black silhouettes on an open sky. Sometimes everything has to be inscribed across the heavens, so you can find the one line already written inside you. Sometimes it takes a great sky to find that small, bright, and indescribable wedge of freedom in your own heart. Sometimes, with the bones of the black sticks left when the fire has gone out, someone has written something new in the ashes of your life. You are not leaving, you are arriving.